Welcome to Ethics, Contemporary Moral Problems. The corresponding text will continually be linked below. Ethics is almost always included in the major branches of philosophy, which typically include metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and logic. Logic, however, at least in Western philosophy, is more fundamental in that logic is required to make the other branches accessible enough to the student of philosophy to participate in them in accordance with the Western analytic tradition. If you are unfamiliar with logic, please consider reviewing this series of discussions on basic logic to aid you in your journey through the world of philosophy. Logic is essentially the tool you will always use while doing philosophy. While working through these texts and series of discussions, please keep in mind that philosophy inherently involves asking questions and considering views that may make you uncomfortable. If you find that you are not ready to entertain and take seriously ideas that are contrary to your own, dropping this course of study is perfectly natural. It will be here when you are ready, if you should so desire it. 1. Introduction. Philosophy involves thinking well, as our text puts it. While this is true, this statement doesn't come near to defining what philosophy has been, or come to be. Some of the contenders include the discipline that analyzes and asks questions about every other discipline, including itself, the area of study that investigates all areas of study and their presuppositions, the project of refining reasoning, improving sciences, and developing new ones. The list could go on, but no matter how long you spend in philosophy, you'll likely see that they all fall short in some way, though you may find a definition that works for you. The text alludes to the benefits of engaging philosophically and analyzing difficult questions of morality to become a more effective and clearer thinker. Of course, improving our reasoning abilities will be beneficial. After all, what we do for reasons. If we improve our reasoning abilities, in general, we improve our reasons for what we do. Furthermore, improving reasoning abilities improves how we do what we have good reasons to do. Since this seems to follow with some clarity, I will not belabor this point. 2. Respecting ethics. Another important point, beyond respecting ethics, is intellectual modesty. Though some have argued that wisdom requires intellectual modesty, many will reject the proposition that they are wrong about anything moral. As our text says, it can be tempting and comforting to spend time simply defending your initial view, since, after all, few people would come to a debate about vegetarianism or abortion without some pre-existing belief. If you are open-minded in your ethical approach, then you need not reject everything you currently believe, but you should see these beliefs as starting points, or base camps, from which your inquiry commences. I would take this one step further. As an intellectual project, try cultivating objections to your beliefs, and honestly appraise your initial beliefs in light of those objections. You may find that some of your beliefs are completely defensible, and you may find that others are in need of revision. Whether you revise your beliefs or not, you will come to understand your own position more clearly, understanding which beliefs are well-founded and for which beliefs you need to bite the bullet. Cultivating counter-arguments to your own position will also help you avoid cherry-picking in your research and help you learn to overcome the confirmation biases that plague us all. 3. A-level students. As stated, philosophy and ethics are evolving dialogues. Memorization of facts will not get you through the activities of philosophy. To help us do philosophy, we will be standing on the shoulders of our predecessors, using their historical theories as ethical lenses through which we can examine ever-changing contemporary moral problems. We will examine some of these historical theories to aid us in more topical discussions later. 4. Doing ethics well, legality versus morality. The first point brought up regarding doing ethics well was the distinction between morality and legality. If something is immoral, that may provide grounds for its being made illegal, but looking at what is legal cannot necessarily give any clues as to its morality. Nazi Germany is used here as a classic example. But, again, I would go a little further here and point out that many people's starting point in ethics is one of moral relativism. This is an ethical lens which reveals that, what's right for you is right for you and what's right for me is right for me. However, this merely avoids doing ethics, it doesn't do any philosophical work on its own. For example, the most basic, why, is left out. Instead of attempting to explain why something is a moral standard, or moral double standard for that matter, it merely makes a broad knowledge claim about a blunt fact of reality that is, itself, unsupported in any way. Neglecting analysis renders this position less than philosophical and wanting for analysis. Secondly, it appears to reduce matters of morality to mere matters of preference or opinion. When engaging in moral reasoning, it becomes clear that the topics go well beyond mere preferences. For example, when told that one should not have a right to vote, a right to freedom, or a right to life, one is owed, and will typically demand an explanation. But with mere preferences, when we learn that someone prefers a different flavor of ice cream, we may not be able to relate, but we accept it as a mere matter of preference, and there are few passionate demands for explanations or character judgments. In short, moral claims will often involve consequences related to, at least, other people's emotions and often issues with life and death consequences. With that, it should be clear how preference reasoning and moral reasoning differ substantially. Thirdly, with regard to relativism, if two converse and claim opposite propositions are true, the relativist is then committed to the belief that the opposites are both true, which results in a contradiction. In logic, a contradiction is defined as a statement that is always false. Therefore, when analyzing moral or epistemological problems through the relativist lens, it can, at best, make meaningful discussion difficult, and, at worst, might render truth meaningless and political discussion impossible. If relativism is your base camp, enjoy seriously considering ethical theories analyzed by the numerous thinkers from the history of philosophy that we will cover in this course of study. You may adopt new ethical lenses, or, perhaps, it may drive you even further into relativism. But who knows? The only way to find out is to stick around. 5. Doing ethics well, prudential reasons versus moral reasons. The prudential reasons for allowing what might be immoral actions may sound similar to moral relativism, but they may be closer to a different concept, ethical egoism. Through the lens of a strong version of ethical egoism, acting in accordance with one's own interests is also always acting in accordance with morality. However, even on this strong version of ethical egoism, one could argue that compromise and cooperation can contribute to an individual's greatest good. That said, the issues presented in the text regarding appeals to prudential reasons in moral arguments should not be ignored. 6. Doing ethics well, prescriptive versus descriptive claims. Here we are discussing what is often referred to as the is-ought dichotomy, problem, or, as it is here, gap. The is-ought gap, originally put forth by David Hume, is similar to a fallacy referred to as the appeal to nature, which says, if something is natural, then it is morally acceptable. Which is, in turn, somewhat similar to the naturalistic fallacy, which holds that something can be morally good by reducing it to naturally occurring properties such as pleasure. However, each fallacy becomes unique in their own rights with every change. For example, the appeal to nature is more similar to the is-ought gap than the naturalistic fallacy is. The appeal to nature is similar to the example given in the text that, since humans evolved to naturally eat plants and animals, it is morally permissible to eat animals. Which is also an is-ought problem. To make this fallaciousness clearer, consider this articulation: Hitler is killing millions, therefore, he ought to be killing millions. Clearly, this last example does not follow. 7. Doing ethics well, thought experiments. The description given of thought experiments as hypothetical, sometimes fanciful, examples that are designed to aid our thinking about an issue, and the examples further provided in the text are quite good and elucidating. However, the critique of that could never happen is somewhat off. If the critique offered were that would never happen, then we could carry on with no problem. However, thought experiments are not only supposed to serve as laboratories for assessing morality, they are also supposed to serve as laboratories for logical possibilities. For example, we could propose a thought experiment about a universe where the number 7 does not exist. Obviously, if numbers persist past 6, then there is no possible world where 7 doesn't exist without being replaced with something else that represents it. For example, what was 7 would still be 7 conceptually, but be called 8. And what was called 14 would be called 16. But the concept of 7 would persist even in the possible world in this thought experiment. Therefore, there is no possible world where the abstract concept of the number 7 does not exist. Even though the concept of possible worlds and thought experiments represent a case where the first is a subset of the second, as philosophers in the Western tradition, we don't have much reason to be concerned about thought experiments that are not logically possible. So, the critique that something could never happen actually should bother us. Otherwise, the way thought experiments are set out in this section is quite helpful. 8. Doing ethics well, understanding disagreement. This point on understanding disagreement requires some knowledge of basic logic. The example given is a group of 4 friends, each of whom believes a different country has more total Olympic gold medals. Just because none of them agree, it doesn't follow that there is no correct answer to that question. If instead they were arguing about whether euthanasia was moral, again, it wouldn't follow from the fact of their disagreement that there was no correct answer to this question. Focus on the words. It doesn't follow from this. Logically, the truth or falsity of a statement depends on the statement's correspondence to reality. People believing or disbelieving a statement has no bearing on the statement's truth. This is one of the errors that can lead to moral relativism, but it's not the only way to arrive at relativism. Furthermore, it is also possible that moral relativism is not arrived at erroneously. If it is possible, we would just need to discover how. 9. Summary. In agreement with the authors, I hope that we have signposted some errors to avoid when it comes to thinking about ethics, and some strategies to consider instead. It may be worth occasionally revisiting the ideas discussed here during your studies, to test your own lines of argument and evaluate how thinking well is progressing for you. This would not be a weakness. Both the authors and any honest philosopher can reassure you, philosophy is hard. We hope you find this textbook and accompanying discussions useful and rewarding in helping you on your own journey through ethics. 10. Questions and tasks. Though there are 10 questions posed, before next time, please ensure that, at least, the following are answered. 1. How would you explain what philosophy is to someone? 2. Can you figure out if your questions are normative, applied, or metaethical? 3. What is meant by the is-ought gap? Why is it important to remember when discussing ethical questions? 4. Because there are so many different views on moral issues, there cannot be any moral truth. What do you think of this line of argument?